If the height of your soul brings no shade to those who walk in heat, then your height is not a blessing, it is a burden. True elevation is measured by how many lives find comfort beneath you, O seeker of the inner path. Height is not what the eyes see. Height is what the hearts feel. Many people rise like the tall date palm high, proud, impressive, yet beneath their height lies no shade, no ease, no gentleness for others. They stand elevated, but their elevation serves no one. Ibn Arabi teaches, the one who rises upward but does not reach the hearts of people has not risen at all, he has merely drifted away. True greatness is not in reaching the sky, but in bringing the sky closer to those who cannot reach it. Look at the date palm. Its fruits are sweet, but hard to reach. Its height is striking, but its shade is thin. Its beauty is admired, yet its benefit requires effort. Such is the person who grows only outward, not inward, whose ego rises, but whose humility does not. His success shines, but his character does not ease the burdens of others. Understand this secret. Whoever elevates himself but does not comfort the creation, whoever becomes high and does not become useful, has misunderstood the meaning of greatness. Ibn Arabi reminds us, humility is the doorway to the real, pride is the wall that hides him. So rise, but rise inwardly, grow, but grow toward mercy, expand, but expand toward the service of others. Let your greatness be a shade under which tired hearts can rest. Let your knowledge become fruit that hangs low enough for everyone to reach. Elevation without benefit is emptiness. Elevation with benefit is divine. Remember, the tallest trees give the widest shade, the deepest souls bend the lowest, and the greatest humans are those who make themselves small enough for others to feel safe in their presence. So do not seek height for the sake of being seen. Seek depth for the sake of giving, because your height means nothing if no one benefits. True height is never about how high a person appears to stand in the eyes of the world, but about how deeply their presence touches the lives of others. Because greatness that lives only on the surface is like the towering date palm that rises far above every other tree yet gives almost no shade to the traveler who seeks comfort beneath it. And in this lies a profound truth. Elevation without benefit is nothing more than distance, a separation between the self and the people who needed your gentleness, your wisdom, your compassion, your strength. Real height exists when the soul expands in such a way that others feel lighter, safer, more hopeful simply by being near you. And this kind of height cannot be measured in status, wealth, learning, or reputation, for these are only external shadows that pretend to be substance, while the true measurement of a human being is the ease they bring into the hearts of others. Because a person may rise in titles and achievements, yet still remain empty if their rise leaves everyone around them unchanged, untouched, or unheard. And it is here that the essence of spiritual height reveals itself. It is the quiet ability to heal without speaking, to inspire without commanding, to give without measuring, and to uplift without expecting anything in return. And when a person's success becomes a bridge for others rather than a wall of separation, then their greatness becomes meaningful. For anyone can climb high for themselves, but only the truly elevated allow their climb to become a ladder for others to step upon. And this is why the masters of the inner path have always taught that the value of a person's rise is seen not in how bright they shine alone, but in how many lamps they light around them, how many burdens they help carry, how many hearts they help soften, and how many souls they help return to their own dignity. Because elevation without usefulness is like a light placed so high on a mountain that its glow never reaches the valley where people walk in darkness. And in the same way, a human being whose gifts remain unreachable becomes nothing more than a distant figure admired from below, but not truly experienced, not truly loved, not truly beneficial. And it is one of the subtle diseases of the ego that it seeks height only to be seen, not to serve, only to be praised, not to be helpful, only to stand above, not to lift others up. Yet the spirit grows in the opposite direction. It rises by giving, it expands by offering, it becomes spacious by allowing others room to breathe within its presence. And the irony is that those who chase height for themselves remain spiritually small, while those who remain humble and accessible grow into giants without even realizing it. Because the secret is simple: you rise every time you help someone rise. You grow every time you help someone grow. You heal every time you help someone heal. And this is the kind of height that cannot be taken away by circumstance, age, failure, loss, or human opinion. For it is rooted not in the external, but in the inner soil of intention and sincerity. And when a person lives with the quiet commitment that their existence must ease the journey of at least one other soul, they begin to experience a form of elevation that no worldly success can equal, a height that does not separate but connects, not a peak that isolates, but a slope that invites. And such a person becomes like a spring of cool water in the heat of a desert, unnoticed from afar, but life-saving to the one who finds it. And this is why true greatness is never loud, never boastful, never concerned with being recognized, because it is too busy being useful, too busy easing burdens, too busy giving hope. And when a person chooses usefulness over appearance, depth over display, substance over show, they begin to embody a height that is felt rather than seen, a height that lives not above people but within them, a height that continues to grow long after the world stops watching, a height that nourishes quietly like roots hidden beneath the earth. And in this way, the soul begins to rise in a manner that requires no witness, no applause, no recognition, because its rise is not for spectacle but for service, not for visibility but for benefit, not for pride but for the deep inner certainty that a life is only meaningful when it becomes a source of ease for another life. And this is the only height that endures, the only height that matters, the only height that transforms rather than distracts, the only height that the heart can truly call elevation without ever needing to finish the thought. Humility is the unseen foundation upon which every real elevation of the soul is built, because the ego rises fast but collapses quickly, while humility rises slowly yet becomes unshakable. And this is the paradox that many never understand. The more a person lowers themselves inwardly, the higher they rise in the sight of truth, in the sight of people, and in the sight of the one who sees beyond appearances. For humility is not weakness, but clarity. The clarity that reminds a person that greatness is borrowed, strength is borrowed, breath is borrowed, and nothing truly belongs to us except the way we treat others. And this awareness softens the heart in a way that no achievement ever can, making the soul spacious enough to hold compassion, patience, gentleness, and wisdom. And when a person embraces humility, they begin to see others not as obstacles, but as reflections, not as competitors, but as companions on a shared journey. And this shift in perception becomes the starting point of real elevation, because humility dissolves the walls that pride builds, and it allows the heart to expand without fear, without comparison, without the constant need to prove itself. And a heart that expands becomes capable of carrying the weight of others, capable of listening deeply, capable of understanding beyond words, capable of guiding without controlling, and capable of forgiving without being asked. And this is where the soul truly begins to rise, not in the eyes of the world, but in its own inner landscape, because humility removes the noise of the ego, the noise that always demands to be right, to be praised, to be acknowledged. And in the silence that follows, a person begins to experience the depth of their own spirit, a depth that was hidden beneath layers of pride and self-importance. And this depth is where true elevation resides. For the one who is humble becomes teachable, and the one who is teachable becomes wise, and wisdom is the greatest form of height, the kind that cannot be seen but can always be felt. And humility becomes the doorway through which this wisdom enters, reshaping the person from within, making them softer yet stronger, quieter yet more powerful, lower in posture yet higher in essence. And this inner transformation radiates outward in the way they walk, speak, listen, and respond, because humility does not ask to be noticed, it asks to be genuine. And genuineness is so rare that it becomes its own form of elevation, drawing hearts toward it without effort, without strategy, without display. And this is why the truly elevated never speak of their height. never announce their virtues, never cling to their achievements, because they understand that true elevation is fragile when tied to pride, and eternal when tied to humility, and they understand that a mountain does not need to explain its height. A river does not need to explain its depth. A flower does not need to explain its fragrance. And the soul does not need to explain its elevation to anyone. It only needs to stay grounded, rooted, sincere. For humility grounds the soul the way deep roots ground a tree, allowing it to rise higher without fear of falling. And the one who practices humility becomes a source of comfort for others, because people instinctively trust those who do not need to dominate, who do not need to boast, who do not need to be the loudest voice in the room. And humility becomes a refuge for wounded hearts, a lantern for confused minds, a mirror for lost souls, showing them that gentleness is not fragility, but strength in its most refined form. And when humility becomes a person's inner climate, everything around them begins to change. Relationships heal, conflicts soften, egos melt, and the space between hearts becomes easier to cross, because humility invites connection, while pride creates distance. And every step taken toward humility becomes a step away from the illusions that keep a person small, the illusions of superiority, comparison, and control. And each step taken away from these illusions becomes a step toward true elevation, the elevation that does not rise above people but rises within them, the elevation that does not isolate but includes, the elevation that does not demand to be honored but naturally earns honor through sincerity. And this rise continues quietly, steadily, invisibly, until the person becomes someone whose presence calms storms, whose words guide without effort, whose actions heal without intention, and whose existence becomes a kind of invisible height that lifts everyone who comes near it without needing to complete the thought. True greatness must always remain accessible, because greatness that cannot be reached becomes nothing more than a distant image admired from afar but never experienced. And human beings were never created to be distant symbols of success, they were created to be bridges of ease, support, and inspiration for one another. And this is why the wisdom of the inner path teaches that the fruit of a tree is only meaningful when it hangs low enough for others to reach. For what use is sweetness that no one can taste? What use is knowledge that no one can understand? What use is brilliance that no one can touch? And in the same way, a person whose gifts are locked behind pride, ego, or emotional distance becomes like a tall date palm whose fruits are visible but far too high for the tired traveler to reach. And that traveler may admire the tree's height but will walk away hungry, untouched, unchanged. And this is the tragedy of inaccessible greatness. It impresses the world but serves no one. And a greatness that serves no one is an illusion, a hollow shell of achievement that shines brightly from afar but offers no warmth up close, because the true measure of a person's worth lies not in how impressive they seem, but in how easy it is for others to benefit from their presence, their wisdom, their kindness, and their support. And when a person's character becomes a safe place for others, when their words become soft enough to listen to, when their guidance becomes simple enough to follow, then their greatness becomes a living reality rather than a distant concept. And this accessibility does not mean lowering one's value. It means making one's value reachable, digestible, meaningful, and relevant, because what good is wisdom if it confuses? What good is knowledge if it intimidates? What good is success if it creates distance? What good is spiritual depth if it becomes too heavy for others to hold? And the truly elevated understand this truth deeply, which is why their words are simple even when their understanding is vast. Their tone is gentle even when their knowledge is powerful. Their presence is calm even when their insight is profound. And they never use their greatness as a ladder to climb above people, but as a bridge to help people cross their own inner obstacles. And accessibility becomes the essence of their greatness, because they know that every soul is carrying an invisible weight. Every heart is fighting a silent battle. Every mind is struggling with unseen questions. And when a person makes themselves reachable, they become a refuge for those who have nowhere to go with their fears, doubts, confusions, and wounds. And this reachability is not about physical presence, but spiritual presence, the kind of presence that makes people feel seen without being judged, heard without being dismissed, guided without being controlled, and loved without being demanded from. And such a presence becomes a rare form of greatness that draws people naturally, the way light draws the lost in darkness, and accessibility transforms greatness from something private into something shared, something that multiplies rather than hides, something that uplifts rather than isolates. Because when greatness becomes reachable, it becomes transformative. And transformation is the greatest gift one person can offer another. And in this way, being accessible is not a weakness, but a strength, not a lowering of status, but a deepening of humanity, not a loss of power, but an expansion of influence. And this expansion happens quietly, without force, without noise, because the heart always gravitates toward what feels safe, humble, and open, and those who remain unreachable may gain admiration, but those who remain accessible gain trust. And trust is far greater than admiration, because admiration fades when distance grows, while trust deepens the more the connection is nurtured. And a person whose greatness is accessible becomes like a well in the desert, its depth hidden beneath the earth but its water available to every traveler who thirsts. And this availability is what keeps greatness alive, meaningful, and sincere, because the moment greatness becomes too high, too complicated, too polished, or too distant, it dies in the hearts of people and becomes only a monument carved in stone. And monuments may be beautiful, but they cannot give life, cannot give shade, cannot give comfort, and cannot carry burdens. And this is why the truly wise choose to be reachable rather than legendary, relatable rather than intimidating, simple rather than showy, because they know that human hearts do not need more statues. They need more shelters, more bridges, more lights that lead them out of their own darkness. And becoming accessible is the first step toward becoming that light. Even if the thought never reaches a finish, when a person begins to understand that real elevation has nothing to do with how tall they stand in the world, but everything to do with how deeply they serve, a new path of inner transformation opens, a path where service becomes not just an act but a state of being, where the heart learns that greatness is not a throne to sit on but a weight to carry for the sake of others. And as Ibn Arabi teaches, the human being is only completed when he becomes a mirror through which divine mercy flows, meaning that the greatness you seek is not in the rise of your status, but in the rise of the souls you help lift from darkness to clarity, from confusion to understanding, from loneliness to belonging. And when you recognize this truth, service stops feeling like an obligation and becomes a form of worship that elevates you without you even noticing it. Because the moment the ego is removed, your actions become transparent, allowing the light to pass through you to everyone around you. And this is the kind of elevation that does not require applause, position, or recognition, for it comes from the unseen world and is measured by the one who knows the weight of every intention, every silent effort, every unnoticed kindness. And every moment you choose compassion over pride to serve others is to become beneficial, like the tree that stands tall not to display its height but to offer fruit, shade, and comfort. And Ibn Arabi reminds us that the world itself is a manifestation of divine generosity. So the human being, if he wishes to be aligned with the truth of existence, must also become a source of generosity, not merely with wealth but with time, attention, understanding, and presence. For sometimes the greatest service is simply to be there for someone, to listen without judgment, to guide without superiority, to support without expecting anything in return. And when you begin to live in this way, you start to notice that your presence begins to heal spaces, soften hearts, and bring calm to situations that once felt chaotic, because the one who serves becomes a carrier of inner peace, and that peace spreads wherever he goes. Real elevation is never loud, never arrogant, never showy, because the truly elevated person operates from a depth that does not need the noise of recognition, and their service becomes a silent revolution that changes the world one soul at a time. And the beauty of service is that it transforms the servant before it transforms the served, meaning that every act of benefit you offer becomes a lesson, a polishing of your own heart, a removal of the dust that ego and desire place over your spiritual mirror. And the more you polish, the more you reflect divine qualities like mercy, patience, generosity, forgiveness, and tenderness, until eventually people don't see you anymore. They see the qualities you embody. They see the light passing through you, and that is the height that truly matters. A person may rise in wealth, fame, influence, or physical strength, but if his rise does not offer anything to the world, then his elevation becomes empty, like a tall palm tree that offers no shade and fruit that hangs too high for anyone to reach. And Ibn Arabi says that such a rise is a sign of imbalance, for everything in creation that is elevated for a purpose. The clouds rise to bring rain, the mountains rise to anchor the earth, the sun rises to bring warmth and clarity. So, how can a human being rise only for himself? How can he ascend without becoming a source of ease, comfort, direction, or nourishment for others? And once you realize this, you begin to understand that elevation without service is just height, and height without benefit is just loneliness disguised as greatness. Because standing above others means nothing if you cannot reach down to lift them up, guide them,